I had it set up. All right, you're live. Go ahead.
All right, sounds good. We are in 1 Samuel 19 today, and we're going to look at a brief review of how we got to 1 Samuel 19 just to set the stage for the events of this chapter. So, the early part of the book was about the birth of Samuel and the circumstances of the nation during that period and the sins of Eli's sons in chapter 2. And then the political situation in chapters 4 through 6, where you had the Philistines who stole the Ark of the Covenant, and then they were plagued by God when they owned it. They sent it back in chapter 6. Then the historical record of Samuel's judgeship in chapter 7. Chapter 8, the people see that Samuel's getting old, and they don't like his sons who are not righteous, and they say, we want to have a king instead of a judge. And that really upsets Samuel, but God listens, and God says, you can have your king. And so chapter 9, Saul is the first king to be chosen. Chapter 10, he's introduced to the people. Chapter 11, his coronation is recorded. And then we find that he soon lapses into sin and is rejected by God and has to be replaced. And that's the section where we are. Chapter 15, he fell from the position. God sent Samuel to tell him that he would no longer be allowed to be king. And then he went to Jesse's house. Samuel went to Jesse's house to anoint the next king that turns out to be David. Now, David's just a young man at this point, maybe 15 years old, 16 years old. And he goes up to the battlefield in chapter 17, where his brothers are in Saul's army, and they are all there for 40 days when Goliath is challenging God's people to send someone to fight me. Well, Saul's not ready to go, willing to go. David's brothers are not willing to go. Nobody in the army is willing to fight Goliath. But when David gets up there, just as a visitor, just to check on his brothers for his dad, he hears Goliath challenge the armies of God. And he says, I'll fight him. Saul says, you're too young. He says, I killed a lion. I killed a bear. I can kill. God will help me. And Saul says, okay. So he goes down and does exactly that. He slings the rock that brings down the giant. He uses Goliath's own sword to decapitate him and carries his head away as a souvenir, as well as takes his sword, which is going to play a part in today's studies. Then you have David and Jonathan becoming fast friends in chapter 18. Mutual respect there. Jonathan respects David's courage, and they make a covenant with each other to be friends and to Jonathan to protect David, to assist him after his father begins to be jealous of David, envious of David, and want to kill him. Now that gets us to chapter 19, and chapter 19 is where Saul attempts to murder his faithful servant David. So we're going to look at the keys to the chapter next. This chapter we're going to call attempted murder. And the key verse is 19:10. The key thought, truth is thicker than blood. That is, Jonathan is in line to be the next king. Jonathan is Saul's son, blood kin, but he doesn't take Saul's side because he knows that Saul is not in the right. Saul's not acting according to the truth, and so he takes David's side. And that is going to be to the chagrin of his father, who calls Jonathan names and says, you're giving away your position, and this man's against me. But Jonathan says, no, he's not. He's been a faithful servant to you, and there's no reason why you're treating him like this. And for a little while, we're going to notice that Saul listens to him, but soon he falls back into his jealous ways, and he really is losing. I think we're going to see evidence that he's losing his mental state. He becomes so jealous and so fixated on David, who's not even a threat to him, that he's no longer serving as a king. He's not governing. So let's get into the text now. We'll start in verse 1. And Saul spake to Jonathan his son and to all of his servants that they should kill David. So that's a very bold statement for a king to come right out and say, not behind the scenes, not, in just to an executioner or maybe to his bodyguard, but he just tells all of his servants, including his son, that he wants David dead. So there are some notes there. Saul here is failing to understand that Jonathan is an adult, and Jonathan is not just going to go along with his father because they are related or because he's the king. He is independent of his father, and he is not going to carry out this plan to kill David. Now, here's a note under that first line. Sin's spiral can run deeper than ever imagined at the beginning. When Saul became king and he was embarrassed or shy about it, and he was excited to be king and not at all proud. But now we see that he has come to a point where he's willing to commit murder. He's willing to protect his position by eliminating a rival who has not done anything to him. He hasn't even declared himself to be a rival. In fact, he's a servant to the king, and he does not have any desire to take over Saul's throne. He's not trying to run a coup against him. But anyway, Saul here has gone deeper and deeper into sin. And that also reminds me of what's going to happen later with David in 1 Samuel 11 and 12, because David also is going to sin against Uriah in taking his wife. And no doubt David at the first thought, well, this is, just a sin. It's just a one night thing. I'm not going to continue it. But then he gets to the point where he also has his rival executed at his command, that is, at David's command. He figures that it's easier for him to eliminate her husband than try to deal with the consequences of his sin. And then you can put James 1:13 through 15 there, which talks about the process of sin. Every man is tempted of his own lust and enticed, drawn into sin, and sin, when it hath conceived, bringeth forth death. So sin takes us farther than we want to go, farther than we ever thought we would go. When it begins, we think it's just going to be fun. It's going to be short-lived. Nobody's ever going to know about this. I can change at any time, but sin can get its hooks in us, and sin can take us deeper and deeper and deeper until we get to a place where we are really in a terrible relationship with God and with others. Now that brings us to verse 2. But Jonathan, Saul's son, delighted much in David. So he really liked David. They were good friends. So I made the note above that verse that friendship is a powerful force for good. If you have a friend, a faithful friend, then you are rich with something that money can't buy. And if you have more than one friend, you are truly rich. And in order to have friends, we must be friends. But that's one of the great blessings that God has put within the purview of human personality, is the ability to enjoy special relationships with those outside of our own families. We grow up with our family of origin. We have brothers, we have sisters, we have parents. But then as our circle enlarges, we make friends. And those friends sometimes are lifetime friends. And we can continue a relationship even though circumstances may change. We may not be in the same school anymore, or we may not be in the same town anymore. But especially nowadays with all the technology and social media, we can continue to relationships even with people that are not even in the same country with us, much less the same city or state. And we should really value friendships and not take them for granted and not think that we don't need them, because I guess I'll. There was a time in my life when I was guilty of that, and I had friends, but I didn't really. I wasn't someone who placed a lot of emphasis on friends. I was more, geared toward family and career, or preaching and all the things that go on with that. But later, in the last few years, I've come to realize how valuable friends are. And I try to spend some time every day with friends, or if not personally with them, connecting with them through, texting or calling, or spending some time with them when the opportunity is there. And that's blessed my life a lot. And I would encourage you, if you are in that same situation where you're busy with so many other things, don't neglect your friends, but do as Jonathan and David do here. They continued a relationship that lasted for the rest of their lives until Jonathan is killed in battle. And there are a number of verses there that you can use if you want to preach on friendship, both from the Old Testament and the New Testament. Now, the next part of the verse says, Jonathan told David, saying, Saul, my father, seeketh to kill thee. So Saul had no idea that Jonathan was going to rat him out. He was going to take that message to David. But Jonathan is declaring which side he's on here. And he warns him, don't come. Now, therefore, I pray thee, take heed to thyself until the morning. You're not safe tonight. Be careful and abide in a secret place. Hide thyself. I will go out and stand beside my father in the field. And he says to his father in verse 4, the last part of verse 3, I will commune with my father, and I will tell you what I find out. So verse 4, Jonathan spake good of David unto his father. So he's trying to smooth this over. He's trying to be a peacemaker here. David doesn't deserve this treatment. David is not your enemy. You've misjudged him. So you see the lesson that's above verse 4 there. Blessed is one with a loyal friend. You see that in both of those verses. There's some different support verses listed with that one. Now verse 4, after Jonathan speaks to his father listens to him. And Jonathan is saying he's not sinned against you. Good works have been done from him. And by the way, he killed Goliath, who was your enemy, and he saved Israel. And so he doesn't deserve this kind of treatment. He deserves a reward. He deserves to be treated as a hero, not as a villain. Now verse 6, and Saul hearkened to the voice of Jonathan, and Saul swears, the Lord liveth, he shall not be slain. So he's gone back on his vendetta, the price that he put on David's head. But it's not going to last. And I think this is where we're beginning to see that Saul is losing control. He's willing to put a vendetta out against David. He needs to be killed, and then he pulls back. So there's this wishy-washiness about him that shows that his mental state is not stable. And Jonathan called David, verse 7, and showed him everything. And Jonathan brought David to Saul. And the lesson there is, blessed are the peacemakers. Matthew 5, verse 9, you have an illustration of a peacemaker. If you're preaching from the Beatitudes, this is a good Old Testament example to use of how to go about that. He went to David, and then went back to his father, and then he brings the two together. So there's a good short 3-verse span that shows what peacemaking should look like. In verse 8, there was war again with the Philistines. David went out to fight, and he had made a great victory, and they ran away. The Philistines ran away from him. Verse 9, an evil spirit. The evil spirit from the Lord was upon Saul. Again, we talked about that in last class. Saul, God is not overpowering the will of Saul here, because God does not make people sin. So there is an implication here when you take the big picture of the Bible's teaching that Saul is allowing this. Saul is giving in to the weakness or the temptation, and God is allowing it to happen, or that God is causing his will to be carried out between these two kings, the one who is on the way out and the one who is on the way in. Now, so when the evil spirit comes upon Saul, David does what he did before, which is play music for him, and that helps him to generally to be in a better frame of mind. Now, in this case, Saul has a spear, a javelin in his hand as he's listening to David play, and he decides that he will kill David. So there's a lesson in verse 10. Maintaining peace requires effort. He said David's not going to die, but then he changes his mind and he decides that he's going to kill him. So Saul is showing us that in congregations, for instance, or in families and between friends, that there is effort required to maintain the peace, because things are going to happen. You think about in your own history with your friends. Did you ever have a falling out with them? Did you ever have a misunderstanding with them? Did you ever get aggravated with them, or you aggravated them? Either way. And of course, the answer to that is yes. That's the way human relationships work. The same thing in a marriage and a family. There are going to be good times, but there are going to be times when you have troubles. You're going to have to work through them. You have to maintain the peace. What about in congregations? You have a number of families there, and are they always going to see everything eye to eye? Are they always going to feel that, agreed that this is the right way to go? Or, is there ever going to be a time when somebody's going to say or do something that is going to aggravate or hurt the feelings of? Yeah, that's going to happen. So Ephesians 4:3 says that we must endeavor to keep the peace. We must endeavor to keep the peace. We must not assume that just because there is peace in the congregation right now, that the devil is going to allow that to continue and that it could not be disrupted. So it's worth being a peacemaker. It's worth not giving in to those ill feelings and causing a problem and losing something much more valuable than having my way or getting to have my say, and that is being at peace and enjoying good relationships. That's worth a lot, and we should not give that away easily. Now, in verse 10, Saul has an evil thought against David, and he throws that javelin toward David, and it goes into the wall, and David slips away, and he's not killed. But it was not for a lack of effort, because Saul intended to kill him. Verse 11, Saul sent messengers to David's house. When he was not successful killing him, he doesn't give up. Instead, he just changes his tactic. And verse 11, the second part says, and Michal, David's wife, told David, saying, if thou save not thy life tonight, tomorrow thou shalt be slain. In other words, you better act right now, because my father is going to kill you if he can. So I made a note above that verse that this is now two of Saul's children who are taking David's side. Jonathan, Saul's son, takes David's side. Michal, Saul's daughter and David's wife, takes David's side. Now, another lesson to be seen in verse 12, or a lesson to be seen in verse 12, is one should act quickly when salvation is offered. So in this case, you have David's wife saying, "You better do something tonight or you're going to die. You can't put this off." Well, that reminds me of 2 Corinthians 6:2, which says, "Today is the day of salvation." And sometimes we sing a song, "Tomorrow may be too late." And that is so true, because the Lord may come back before tomorrow, or we may lose our life before tomorrow, or we may lose the motivation to obey tomorrow. So we should obey while we have the opportunity before that opportunity passes. And whenever we are having Bible studies with other people, we also want to remind them of this fact. We want to remind them that you don't want to procrastinate once you know what to do. You want to act upon it because God has allowed you to have this opportunity. Your life has been spared, and don't take advantage of that. Do not waste the opportunity God has given. Now that gets us down to verse 12. So Michal let David down through a window. So Saul's servants are watching. They're going to try to catch David and kill David. So Michal says, "Why don't we slip out the back way?" And she lets him down through a window. Maybe she holds the rope and he walks down the wall if it's too high to jump down from. And he fled away and escaped. And so, verse 13, and Michal took an image, that is an idol, maybe a statue of some god, and laid it in the bed and put a pillow of goat's hair for his bolster, covered it with a cloth. So what she's doing is making it look like David is asleep in the bed. And so when the servants come in to arrest David, they see what they think is David asleep in the bed, but it's not him. And she says to them, "He's sick." And so they leave and go back to Saul, and they tell him, "Well, he was sick in bed." And I think this is funny. Saul must have rolled his eyes and said, "I'm trying to kill the guy. It doesn't matter if he's sick. Bring him up here and let's get this taken care of." And so they go back. And then when they go to get him, they find out, oh, wait, it's a trick. He's not even here. So there are three different notes that we can make on those three verses. The first one is believers should not keep idols nearby. I mean, why in the world does Michal have a false god in her house that she could just go get and put in this bed? Why have an image there? This is Israel. These are God's people. The law said, "Thou shalt not have any image," Exodus 20:1-5. And yet she has an image in her house. And you could put 2 Corinthians 6:17 there, which says, "Come ye out from among them, and be ye separate, saith the Lord, and touch not the unclean thing." So we don't need to have any sins and memories of our past sinful life nearby. We don't need to leave alcohol in the house if we used to drink and we just put it, up in a counter or in a cabinet somewhere. Get rid of it. Get rid of the temptation. If there are bad movies that we used to watch, let's don't keep those in our account. Let's delete them. If there are whatever it is that may be a temptation to us or to our families, get rid of it. Don't keep idols nearby. The second note that you may make, if you want to, from verse 14, is when we are given a command, we must keep the commander's intent in mind. I read a book some years ago. I don't remember the title nor the author anymore, but it was a book about getting things done And that might have been the title of it. It might have been the book called Getting Things Done. But there was a chapter in there on the commander's intent. And he went back to the Vietnam War and talked about how they were fighting. The battles were moving and the enemy was moving so quickly that by the time the commander gave the command and it went down through the chain to the unit that would carry out the command, that when they got to that hill, it had already changed and they had moved on. And so they learned not to only give a command, but to give a commander's intent with the command, to explain what the commander is wanting to accomplish, so that those who are lower in command could make a decision at the ground level. Like if the enemy's moved off of this hill, but he's on that one over there, then the commander's intent is not just to take this hill, it's to conquer that force. So we can go over there and carry out the commander's intent. So you see an illustration of this here. Saul told them, go get David and bring him to me. But when they got there, the circumstances were not what they expected, so they went back without doing it. But they should have realized what Saul wants is David to be killed. So whether he's sick or not really is beside the point. Let's do what the king has told us to do. Then in verse 15, the note that I just gave, it does not matter if he's sick. I'm going to kill him anyway. So you may want to write that with that verse. Now that gets us down to verse 16. The messengers came back. I covered that. Verse 17, another lesson about marriage from this text. And you remember that Michal loved David, and that's why she ends up with him. That the older sister was given to somebody else who was supposed to be married to David, but Michal loved him. And so Saul says, okay, well, you can marry him. So they had a good relationship initially, and it's still good at this point. Later, it's going to not be good. But here we see this lesson from David and Michal. Wives' loyalty should be to the new family and not to the original family. If choice has to be made, then God has already made the choice. You remember in Genesis 2:22-24, when God instituted marriage in the first place, he said, for this cause shall man leave father and mother, and shall cleave to his wife, and they twain shall be one flesh. So you have three different commands there: leave, cleave, and weave two lives together. So the first one of those is to leave the family of origin, because no one has enough time, enough energy, enough talent to maintain the same level of involvement in two families. So God says, I want you to forsake your family of origin. That doesn't mean you don't have any relationship with them. It means that it dies down. It's not primary anymore. And the new family is primary. And you see here that Michal rejects Saul, her father, her original family, and takes the side of David, her husband, her new family. And it depends on the family dynamics, but sometimes families make us make those decisions. They are not, they try to, they vie for the attention of the daughter or of the son against the wife or the husband. And that must be dealt with in the younger couple. They must say, no, my loyalty is to my spouse. I cannot honor you above them. And that's what is illustrated here positively by Michal. That brings us to 18. And she does tell a lie here about what happened to protect herself, and there's no justification for that. It's recorded because it happened, but it's not an example for us to follow. So when she gets in trouble with Saul, who asks, "Why did you deceive me and help my enemy?" Well, that's her husband. He should have understood, but he said to me, "Let me go. Why should I kill thee?" He threatened to kill me, and so I had to do it. Well, that's a lie. She's the one that told him, "You need to get out of here before you get killed." But anyway, that gets us to 18. And David fled and escaped and came to Samuel to Ramah. So you remember that Samuel is the generation ahead of David. Saul is the generation ahead of David. And so David is in trouble, and he decides that he will go to God's judge, Samuel, and his prophet, so that he can get some assistance or some advice on how to handle this. Told him what Saul had done, and he and Samuel went and dwelt in Naioth. There's a lesson to be seen in verse 18. The young should go to the old in times of trouble. You know, we were just talking about parents, and generally speaking, parents are our best friends. You know, they want the best for us. Now, there are parents that don't live up to their responsibilities, but generally speaking, you know, you go through a hard time in life, the first person you can go to is your mom or to your dad. You know, that they're there for you, and they will be good to advise. Good to advise. Like, I don't really understand. I had a call yesterday from no 2 days ago now, from um, some friends of mine. They're older than me. Their kids are younger than me, so I'm sort of between the two. But they were looking for some advice because of a pending divorce situation, and it's just really sad to see families having to deal with that. But she had come to them and said, you know, what should I do? How should I handle this? Well, I think that's the right thing to do. You don't, you don't go to your parents every time you have a spat or a problem with your spouse. But when it gets to be really a problem that divorce is being talked about, then you're going to need to get somebody to help outside of the immediate couple. And a lot of times that would first be parents. It might be a preacher, it could be elders, can be counselors. But we should go to those who are older in times of trouble because they have wisdom and advice for us. You could put Titus 2:4 there. The older women are to teach the younger women. And told him all that Saul had done, and he and Samuel went. So I see also a lesson here from the other direction. The old should support the young when they need it. I don't know what Samuel had going on at that time. I'm sure he was busy, but as soon as David came to him, he stopped whatever else he was doing and he helped the young man who needed his help. So there's a lesson for us that we need to take time for the younger people when they need us. We should not be too busy to help our children or to help the younger people in our congregation who may not have good parents to advise and help them. You could put Psalm 78:18 there for a lesson. Now, verse 19, it was told to Saul that David is in Naioth in Ramah. And Saul sent messengers to take David. So he's still trying to apprehend him so he can execute him. And when they saw the company of the prophets prophesying and Samuel had appointed over them, the Spirit of God was upon the messengers of Saul, and they also prophesied. So they were defeated in their purpose by joining in this prophecy. I don't know what all was involved in this, but the main point is they did not arrest David because the Spirit of God caused them to prophesy instead of carry out Saul's evil intent. Then in verse 21, And when it was told Saul, he sent another group of messengers. And the same thing happens again. God is putting up a barrier between Saul and David. And I made the note there in verse 21, it's hard to fight against God. Acts 9:4, that's uh, what Saul of Tarsus finds out. It's hard to fight against God. It's hard for thee to kick against the pricks or against the goads. Now, verse 22, so Saul decides, I'll just take care of this myself. And he goes down to Ramah and he asks where they are. And so he's told they're in Naioth. So he goes over there, and then Saul becomes a prophet. Now, this had happened earlier when Saul first became king or was about to become king. You may remember he prophesied, and so they asked, is Saul also among the prophets? And here he strips off his clothes. That probably doesn't mean he was naked. It probably means he took off his royal garments and he just wore his common clothes that were under his royal robe, and prophesied before Samuel in like manner, and lay down naked. Or perhaps it is more than just his common clothes, but I think that sometimes the word naked doesn't necessarily mean to be without any clothing, but not to be without sufficient clothing or without a particular kind of clothing. And all that night, wherefore they say, is Saul also among the prophets. All right, that's all of chapter 19. Does anybody have a question or a comment on anything in that verse?
Yes,
all right, let's. Okay, go ahead.
I have a question in verse 9. So, how should we understand this expression? Because God's just and holy characters. So here say the able spirit from the Lord came upon Saul. So I don't understand that verse.
Excuse me. Yes, we talked about that some last time. What I think is happening here is that the Lord is getting credit for what the Lord allows. Now, since it's the same thing, if you've studied the book of Exodus, where it says the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, and then in another passage it says Pharaoh hardened his heart. So which one was it? Well, Pharaoh hardened his heart, but God allowed it, and God used it in order to carry out his will in that case. The same thing is true here. You have Saul, who is not desiring to do the will of God anymore. He has rebelled against God. He did not obey the command to kill all the Amalekites and destroy all their property. He offered a sacrifice that he had no authority to offer. So he's been rejecting God repeatedly. And so now God says, okay, if you're going to reject me, then I'm going to take my spirit away from you. And an evil spirit came upon him. And in that sense, because David removed his Holy Spirit from him, God allowed the evil spirit to come that Saul invited by his own decisions. Therefore, it did not come directly from God, but because it's God's world and because he has been God's servant, there is what would be a metonymy for cause there. That is a figure of speech where even though God did not cause it, because he is in control or in charge, it's attributed to him. And I think I used the illustration the other day about a president. A president somebody may say, well, President Trump is fighting with the Russian president. Well, they're not actually fighting, or they might say, well, Abraham Lincoln is back in earlier history. Abraham Lincoln attacked Gettysburg today. Well, or Vicksburg today. Abraham Lincoln defeated Vicksburg today. Well, he wasn't actually there, but it was his army that did it. So you see there's the same kind of idea. I don't know if that makes sense to you, but that's how I see verse 9. Anybody else have a comment on that or a question? Dave, if you're in the background and want to make a comment, I'll be happy for you too. Go ahead, David.
Uh, I think this is the first time where we see the company of the prophets, right, in the Bible. So I was thinking, maybe
Yes.
I'm not sure. I was thinking about that, about how the government was corrupt at this moment. So the prophet decided to do something not against the government, but to train people
Yeah.
to stand for the Lord and to prepare. So I like that.
Yeah, that reminds me of two things, David. I'm glad you brought that up. One is um, First Samuel is where we're introduced to the schools of the prophets, and that's what we're seeing here. They will be focused more on later. So there are these schools like preacher schools today, like Georgia School of Theology, where men go to be trained to be prophets, or in this case, to be preachers today. The second thing is that there is a shift in Israel from the priest being the primary leaders of religion to the prophets being the primary leaders of religion. What has happened is the priests have become corrupt and people don't respect them and God does not use them, and the prophets are faithful to God. So there is just this shift, because you had the sons of Eli who were priests, but they were corrupt. And so now you have Samuel, who is a prophet, and the young men that he's training, and other prophets that will come along later, they become the voice of God instead of the priest. Now, some priests were still faithful and still were used by God, but I guess you would say the leadership shifted from priests to prophets during this period of time. I'm glad you brought that out, and we'll see that again later, I think. All right, let's go into verse 1 of chapter 20. But before we do, let's do the keys to the chapter here. So chapter 20 is going to be the friendship covenant between David and Jonathan. They've made a covenant before, but they're going to renew it and expand it in this chapter. Your key verse is 20 verse 3. 20 verse 3. The key thought: when your seat is empty, people will miss you. And that's from verse 18. When we get there, we'll talk about how to make that application today. And then in the next place, the outline, there are 42 verses in this chapter. So a long chapter. But the outline is just 4 parts, and they're simple ideas. Verses 1 through 13 is a plan. David and Jonathan come up with a plan to protect David. And then 14 to 17 is the covenant, a covenant between these two very faithful friends. And then 18 to 34 is a test. Is Saul going to carry out his vendetta, or can he be talked out of it? And then 35 to 42, a signal so that David can know what Jonathan found out without them having to come together and speak face to face, because that's dangerous. So they have this signal of shooting the arrows close or far, and that will tell you what the mood of my dad is, Jonathan says. All right, verse 1, and David fled from Naoth in Ramah and came and said before Jonathan, we have, what have I done? What is mine iniquity, and what is my sin before thy father, that he seeketh my life? One thing that is natural when someone is suffering is to want to know why. They want to figure it out. You don't want to be in confusion. It's like, I just don't understand why this is happening. I don't understand why they are treating me this way, or I don't know why God is allowing this to happen. That's a very common, maybe even universal desire to understand. And this is where David is. He's saying, I don't understand why your father hates me. It doesn't make sense to me. I've been faithful to him. I've helped him. I've not done anything to him. I'm not trying to overthrow him. Why is he treating me like, why does he want to kill me? So what is my iniquity? Please tell me so I can repent, or so I can change, or so I can understand. Now, there are some notes around that verse. I just covered that first one, but I didn't give you all those verses. It is natural to ask why in times of trouble. And Job, of course, is the perfect example of that. Job 3:11 and 12, he wanted to know why. And then in Job 3:23, and even Jesus asked why when he was in the garden, Matthew 27, and then later on the cross, 45, for 45, that's probably 45 through 50. I think that's a typo there. It's either 25 to 30 or 45 to 50. So if one of you will take the time to look that up, we'll make that correction there. So look at Matthew 27 and see where Jesus asked why, if it is 25 to 30 or 45 to 50, which one of those passages. Now, the second note here is there does not always have to be a logical reason for persecution. You know, if you're looking for a reason that makes sense, you may not find it, because it does not make sense for Saul to persecute David. There's no logic to it. It's just jealousy, it's hatred. It's he's invented a phantom enemy here. It's not going to make sense. And you could put Matthew 5:10 through 12 there. And then the third lesson, one should not assume there will be communication when sin is involved. So David wants to know, but he's not going to find out, because Saul's not going to communicate with him. Saul's not going to tell him why he's doing what he's doing. So sometimes things don't make sense because there's no communication. You can have that situation in a congregation. Maybe the elders don't communicate to the members what's going on. Maybe they're not at liberty to because of confidential situations. Sometimes a preacher may be asked to leave. I know a preacher that was asked to leave, and they never told him any reason for it. And that was really frustrating to him. That was hard for him to deal with. He wanted to know, what did I do wrong, or why are you replacing me? But they never would. And sometimes that's not the only time I've heard of that. And sometimes I've heard of this more often, though. Sometimes they'll give another reason that's not really the reason. You know, they'll give an excuse, but not give you the real reason. Well, we just have to be mature enough to say, I trust in God's providence. And if I can't work here, I'll work wherever God sends me. I'll continue to serve the Lord, and it'll all make sense later on. And right now, that what makes sense is that I need to use my life in serving God. Now, you could put Psalm 90, verse 8, and Proverbs 9:17 there on the sin and the lack of communication. Did anybody look up our passage in Matthew? Did you figure out whether it's 45 to 50 or not? All right, while you're doing that, I'm going to shift over and take this question that David asked, what is my iniquity? And build a sermon under that title. You ask Eve, if Eve says, what did I do wrong? What is my iniquity? Well, you ate the forbidden fruit. What about Noah? Well, you got drunk. What about Abraham? Lying. What about Moses? You struck the rock. What about David? Adultery, murder. So you can ask that question and build a sermon about the temptations that have failed great servants of God. Failed like a tree is failed, cut down. So temptation can cut down, and has cut down some of God's great. What sin did David in? What sin did Solomon. So each one of these had an iniquity that can be laid at their feet. And we should learn the lessons. We don't want to be like David and commit adultery. We don't want to be like Abraham and be guilty of lying. We don't want to be like Peter and deny the Lord. So you could build a pretty good sermon from that simple question. David does not have iniquity here to lay at his feet, but other people do. And so you can make that point. All right, David, did you look up that verse? Where does Jesus say why? I guess that's my
Yeah.
question.
It is on 46. Is he say, "Why hast thou forsaken me?" So it's
All right,
40,
that's good.
45, 50.
Very good. We guessed right. All right, so make that. You don't need to make a correction if you wrote it that way. So let's move on into verse 2. And said unto him, God forbid, thou shalt not die. So here Jonathan is being a little naive. He's saying, David, you're making a bigger deal out of this than you have to. And David is not. David says, your father already tried to kill me with a spear. Your father already sent people to arrest me. Your father is trying to kill me. And Jonathan is saying, my father will tell me before he does it, and I'll warn you. And David says, no, your father knows that you're on my side. He's not an idiot. He knows that you've taken my side because you've already defended me to him. So I don't think that I can trust your father communicating to you about his evil intent against me. So verse 3, thy father certainly knoweth that I have found grace in thine eyes. And he saith, let not Jonathan know this. Don't tell Jonathan, because he's going to tell David, lest he be grieved, or at least he'll be upset with me. But truly as the Lord liveth and as thy soul liveth, there is but a step between me and death. David could have a misstep, and Saul could catch him and kill him. So that's a true statement. But we also see here that that's a true statement for any of us as well. There is but a step between you and death today and me and death today. I mean, I'm on the road driving, 8.5 hours behind a wheel to Indiana. Well, anytime you get behind a wheel might be the last time that you got behind a wheel. You never know. What about a heart attack? What about a stroke? What about murder? An aneurysm, falling downstairs? There are ways that we can face an untimely death. That's not to be morbid, but it is to make this point that we should always be ready not to live past today. If today's the last day, that's okay, because I can go on to what I'm looking forward to going to, which is to be with God. And hopefully I'll be able to stay and serve a long time, but always know that there is but a step between any person and death. There are several verses there that you would want to study in relation to that. James 4:14, life is but a vapor. Hebrews 9:27, it's appointed a man wants to die. 2 Corinthians 6:2, today's the day of salvation. Luke 12:15 and 20, you have the rich farmer who this night thy soul shall be required of thee. And then Proverbs 28:1, do not boast yourself of tomorrow. So those are all timely verses that relate to that. Now that brings us to verse 4. Then said Jonathan unto David, whatsoever thy soul desireth, I will even do it for thee. So a couple of lessons about friendship here. A true friend puts no limits on the aid he will give in the day of trouble. Whatever you need, you just need to ask. That's what Jonathan says. He doesn't put any limitations on it. And Matthew 7:12 is the golden rule. Whatsoever you would that men should do to you, do to them. So if you were in a day of trouble, you would want someone to do whatever you needed. So be that person. And so I wrote above that statement of Jonathan, friendship, I'm here, just name it. I'm here, just name it. All right. we're an hour into our study, so I think we'll take a break here and come back at verse 5 momentarily. So I will put the next chapter keys on the screen during the break.
Brother, I
Yes.
miss the last two characters on what is my
Oh,
iniquity.
okay.
Can you show it real quick?
Yeah.
Judas and Peter. Okay, thank you.
Judas is betrayal and Peter is denial. All right. Now I'm going to go ahead and put it on the screen just to speed up the process. If you don't have to do this, we'll cover it in a few minutes, but it's on the screen there if you want to write those keys to chapter 21, and also there's a sermon there at the bottom of the screen also. I unplugged it. Sorry. Let's see if it comes back up.
How long will be the break, brother? 15?
It's going to be 15. So let's see if this comes back up. And if it doesn't, I'll try to go back through the process. Probably we'll have to go back to the process. So, unto thee, O Lord, do I lift up my soul. Unto thee, O Lord, do I lift up my soul, my Lord. I trust in thee. Let me not be ashamed. Let not mine enemies triumph over me. Yea, let none that wait on thee be ashamed. Let none that wait on thee be ashamed. All right, now I think it's coming back up. All right. All right. If you're ready, we'll get started back here. We were
Detective, did you compare these photos with those taken during the search of the defendant's house? Yes.
all right. I think we were down to verse 4, down to verse 5. And David said unto Jonathan, Behold, tomorrow is the new moon, and I should not fail to sit with the king at meat, but let me go, that I may hide myself in the field unto the third day at evening. So hopefully that'll come back up. I think I just bumped into it. So what David is saying here is that he's trying to avoid going to the festivities because Saul's trying to kill him. And if he shows up there, then that'll give Saul an opportunity to arrest him and execute him. So instead, he's making an excuse to try to be somewhere else, and at least to have a cover story about being somewhere else. And so he's working it out with Jonathan to tell his father that he had to go home for a while, that his brother requested that he come down to make a sacrifice in Bethlehem, and therefore he can't be at the king's feast. Well, that's not true, of course, but you have David trying to somehow navigate this situation, which is very dangerous for him. There are several times during this that David lies when he should have found another way to be successful in saving himself, not telling a lie that is not justifiable. I'm trying to get it to come back on the screen, so give me just a second here. I don't know why it's not showing up.
Brother,
Hey, brother, go ahead.
this maybe it can be that this annual sacrifice was all the time. So sometimes he missed it because he was with the king, but this time he find a great opportunity to don't be with the king.
Yeah, it is possible that's the case, but it just doesn't seem, because we're going to see David tell some other lies later as we go through. So if this were the only one, we might be able to make an excuse for it, that it, maybe there was something going on, but and it could be, but it seems to me that I haven't been able to find that he went to Bethlehem, even though he says that. When you read through these chapters, there's no record of it. So I just wonder if he just made up that cover story so that he would have Jonathan would have something to say to his father when he asked. All right, let's go into it. Should be back up now, I think, for you. So let's go back up. I'm going to make it full screen again. All right. So verse 7, if he doesn't act like it's a big deal for me to be gone, then we'll know that he's not really mad. But if he gets angry about that, we know that he really did have some ill determinations against me. Verse 7, and that gets us down to verse 8. David says he seems to be doubting Jonathan's loyalty here a little bit. And he says, therefore thou shalt deal kindly with thy servant, for thou hast brought thy servant a covenant of the Lord. So he's reminding him that they've made an agreement. But he says, notwithstanding, if there be any iniquity, slay me thyself. If there be any iniquity in me, slay me thyself. For why shouldest thou bring me to thy father? So he's saying, if this is just a trick and you're going to turn me over to your dad, then just go ahead and take care of it right now. you're a warrior, you're a soldier, you can execute me yourself. So he doesn't need to do it. You can do it if that's what's happening. And then Jonathan responds to that. And I guess you can understand it with as much pressure as David is under, as young as he is, and how surprised he is to have to, have the king fighting against him, just a young man. So, but Jonathan responds correctly, and he says, "Far be it from me, for if I knew certainly that evil were determined by my father to come upon thee, then would not I tell it thee?" I'm not trying to trick you. I'm not there's not I'm being transparent here, so don't second guess us. Then said David to Jonathan, "Who shall tell me what if thy father answer thee roughly?" In other words, if he does intend evil against me, then how are you going to get that message to me? Well, that brings us to this next section. You remember when we outlined the chapter, so 1 to 13 is a plan, and then 14 to 17 is a covenant, and 18 to 34 is the test. Now, you can remind me to come back to this. I think I would like to go a little farther into the chapter, but what this map is shows us the places where the events here take place, so we can circle back and come back to these a little later. But let's go ahead and get further into the story before we do. So that brings us down to verse 11. And Jonathan said to David, "Come, let us go out in the field." And they went out both in the field. Jonathan is saying here, "Let me show you something. We'll figure it out. Let's go out here." And so they go out. And Jonathan said to David, "O Lord God of Israel." That's an interesting statement. He says, Jonathan says to David, but then he addresses God. "O Lord God of Israel, when I have sounded my father about today, tomorrow, anytime." So what I see there is an acknowledgement that God listens to all conversations and knows all of our plans. You may have a conversation in private with your wife or your husband, or with a friend like David and Jonathan here, but never forget that God listens to all conversations and he knows all of our plans, and we want to make sure we include God in our plans and that our conversations acknowledge that we are dependent upon him. So you can put Deuteronomy 1:27 there. Also Psalm 106:25 and Hebrews 4:13, which says, "All things are naked and opened unto him with whom we have to do." So God knows everything, God sees everything, therefore we should acknowledge and trust him. That gets us to verse 12. And Jonathan said unto David, as we noticed, "I've sounded up my father tomorrow. I'll let you know. I will show it to you." Now, verse 13 is the oath. "The Lord do so and much more to Jonathan. But if it please my father to do thee evil, then I will show it thee and send thee away that thou mayest go in peace." So if my father's trying to kill you, I'm not going to bring you in and then let him catch you. I will warn you in a way that he won't understand and that won't bring you in danger. Verse 14, "Thou shalt not only while I yet live show me kindness." So this is the section that deals with a renewed covenant, the renewed covenant. And Jonathan wants to extend it, which was wise, beyond his own death, because he is going to die before David, and he seems to anticipate that here. And he says, "I'm going to do this for you, but I'm also wanting you to do something for me. I want this to be a two-way street." And this will also help David to trust him, because David now knows that Jonathan has a motivation to support him, because Jonathan is counting on a favor from David as well. That gets us to 15. Well, the last part of 14, while yet I live, show me the kindness of the Lord that I die not, but also that thou shalt not cut off thy kindness from my house forever. No, not when the Lord hath cut off all the enemies of David, everyone from the face of the earth. So here's a lesson to be observed from that. One should secure blessings for the future of one's children when possible. That's what Jonathan is doing here. He says, I would like for you to bless my children after me, because you're eventually going to be the king. You're eventually going to have all your enemies put down. It's not always going to be like this. And then I would like for you to bless my family because of how I've blessed you here. Well, that's a great, I think there's a lesson there that you and when we are going through, going through life, we're anticipating the future when we won't be here anymore, but we can still bless our children. We can make decisions that will help them later, especially decisions to help them to go to heaven, but also decisions that might have to do with their relationship with each other and financial or business decisions that can pay off later. So Jonathan made a covenant, verse 16, let the Lord even require it at the hand of David's enemies if you break this. And Jonathan caused David to swear again because he loved him, for he loved him as he loved his own soul. So this is a great example of friendship and brotherly love, Philadelphia love. There's no kind of indication at all in anything that's said about David and Jonathan of a homosexual kind of relationship. Now, I know that the gay community, the homosexual community, sometimes tries to bring Jonathan and David into that community, into their support, but the Bible does not at all support that. There is no romantic love here. It's just brotherly love. Now, verse 18, then Jonathan said to David, tomorrow is the new moon. So that was a time when they would have a feast day, religious services, and thou shalt be missed because thy seat will be empty. So we said this was the key lesson that we could observe from this chapter. So let's expound on that a little bit. If you wanted to use this as a sermon text or in your Bible class, then you can use it to talk about the value of worship and the personal responsibility in worship and how much it's valued not only by the one who's enjoying the worship or benefited from it, but others as well. So when our seat is empty, we are missed by God, Jesus, the Holy Spirit, our brethren, by those who could have been influenced by us. That's a pretty good list, isn't it? You think about, I've mentioned this before when we had a gospel meeting. I would sometimes remind the brethren, we're going to be inviting visitors to come all week to hear the gospel. And we need our congregation to be here to welcome them and to make the service exciting and the singing better and for there to be a energy in the room. And we're going to have guests coming from other congregations. And we don't want to have other congregations here. And it's not even their meeting. And then for our members not to be here, So you can remind people that it's not just about your schedule. It's not just about, it's going to put me out. Remember that God is there waiting to be worshiped. And God is there desiring our expressions of love. And so when our seat is empty, it's not inconsequential. We are indeed missed. This is a good text to use in that discussion. Verse 19, when thou hast stayed 3 days, then thou shalt go down quickly and come to the place where thou didst hide thyself by the stone Ezel. Now here's the plan. This is how he's going to let him know if he can come in or if he needs to flee. And so I'll just summarize this section because we really need to cover. We're supposed to cover it through chapter 25 today. So let me just summarize this. What he says is, I will come out to this same area that we are used to, we're familiar with, and you hide yourself, but I'll know you're there 3 days from now, and I will shoot arrows. And I will say to the young man that comes to fetch the arrows for me, before I send him, I'll shoot them short and I'll let him go past and say, come back and get the arrows. They're behind you. Or if you need to run, I'll shoot them far and I'll tell the young man to keep going because the arrows are beyond you. And you will know by what I say, either you can come in or you should flee away. And that's exactly how it ends up, that he needs to flee away. Verse 25, David's place was empty. His seat at the head table was not occupied, and Saul notices it. But the first day he says, well, there's probably a good reason for it. But the second day, he knows something is up. And so he asks Jonathan, and Jonathan gets in trouble about it, which we'll get to. But let's read verse 26. Nevertheless, Saul spake not anything that day, for he thought something hath befallen him, he is not clean. So here's a lesson from that. One needs to be clean or holy to appear before God. When we come into worship, we need to be holy like David. Like Saul is saying, well, maybe he touched, like if you touched a dead body, you were unclean, other things. And so he couldn't come to worship if he were not ceremonially clean. This is not a hygienic thing. It's not that he needed to take a bath. It's that a certain period of time had to pass after activities before you could go into worship. And that's what Saul thinks may have happened. So he doesn't say anything because he thinks, well, he'll be here tomorrow. But then he's not here tomorrow. And there are 3 verses listed there that you could put down about the holiness that we should use in worship, or we should have before worship and in worship. 1 Timothy 2:8, maybe the best of the 3, which says to lift up holy hands in worship. That's not talking about a worship posture. It's talking about the character of a life, that our hands are holy, therefore we can worship. Now, it may have to do with the Jewish practice of holding their hands out in answer or during prayer, but it's really talking about the character of the Christian in worship, that is hands. Hands are a figure of speech that stand for the activities of the body, because most of what we do, we use our hands to do it. Therefore, our hands are dirty if we've been sinning. Our hands are clean if we've been holy. That's the idea in 1 Timothy 2:8. Now, that gets us down. David's place is empty again in verse 27. So Jonathan is asked by Saul, and he tells his father that David wanted to go to Bethlehem because he had a sacrifice, but Saul is not buying that at all. Saul knows that this is just a stunt, this is a cover story. I don't believe it. So, verse 30, he responds in anger. Then Saul's anger was kindled against Jonathan, said to him, Now notice how he speaks to his own son here. Now, in English, this comes across as not something vulgar, but you can tell that's the idea behind it. Thou son of the perverse, rebellious woman. So he's castigating his mother. Well, that's still a form of a curse today. Do not, I know that thou hast chosen the son of Jesse to thine own confusion and to the confusion of thy mother's nakedness. So he's speaking out of sorts. He should not be talking to his own son like this. But you see that when one is angry, he often says things he ought not say. And he often says those things to someone he ought not say them. When a person gets angry, a lot of times they take it out on their spouse or their children or their friend. And those are people that certainly don't deserve to be treated or talked to that way because we're angry with someone else or even angry with them. We should not use abusive language. Now, here's one lesson, or one way to express that lesson. Uncontrolled anger, and anger directed at children, even adult children, is hurtful. And you can see that here, but also in verses 33 and 34. And in the New Testament, a good passage is Ephesians 4:26. So a lot of people in our society, maybe all societies, struggle with anger issues. And therefore, we have to be careful not to set certain people off because they are, they're like a time bomb waiting to go off. And if you say the wrong thing, you do the wrong thing, you make them angry, then you may indeed bear some scars for that. Sorry about this. I'm just trying to get the sun off the screen there so I can see a little better. All right. I think that's going to work a little better. All right. And so we should be careful that we do not allow anger to injure our relationships, and especially those with our children, because even adult children still rely on their parents and they are hurt by hurtful words. So we need to be not to give in to that temptation. Now, verse 31, for as long as the son of Jesse liveth upon the ground, thou shalt not be established, nor thy kingdom. Wherefore now send and fetch him unto me, for he shall surely die. Now, what Saul is saying here is that I want you to be king. And David is a threat to that. And therefore, David has to die so that you can be king one day, because I want my son to be king. Now, he doesn't even act like Jonathan has any say in that Jonathan should be asked or talked to or with about that. So here's a lesson to be observed there at verse 31. Parents' goals for their children may not match the child's goals. We cannot live vicariously through our children. We were allowed, or should have been allowed, the right to determine what we do in life, what occupation we pursue, who we marry, what decisions we will make, even spiritually. No one else can make those decisions for us. They can encourage us, they can teach us, but our parents must give autonomy to the child. And we sometimes may be tempted to do that. As preachers, for instance, I always wanted my boys to be preachers, but that's not my decision. That's their decision. Both of my sons do. One of my sons is a preacher, and one of my sons works for house to house. He's involved in ministry all the time, full time with the church. That's his job. So I'm very pleased with that. But even if they had decided to do something else, I would have still loved them, and I would have supported them if they wanted to be, a woodsman or a carpenter or a doctor or whatever. That was their decision to make. And we cannot live through our children, and we should not try to pressure them in a way that makes life difficult for them, and that is unfair. And I think you see an example of that here with Saul trying to make Jonathan be the king when Jonathan is perfectly willing for David to be king. And Jonathan answered his father, wherefore shall he be slain? What hath he done? He doesn't deserve to die just because you want me to be king. That's not even considering him at all. He doesn't deserve to die because of your ambition for me. So Jonathan arose from the table in fierce anger. So his father is angry, and now he's angry. And he did not eat, and he did eat no meat the second day of the month, for he was grieved for David because his father had done him shame. So there's true friendship where even though his father thinks he's looking out for Jonathan, Jonathan's looking out for David, and he wants David to be honored and not to be persecuted, even if it benefits him in being king. All right, so then they go through the little exercise with the arrows and the boy in the next few verses, and that brings us down to 39. That little boy that went out there to fetch the arrows for Jonathan, he never knew what was going on. He did not understand that this, code language is being used. Now, there's a lesson that we ought to observe, I think, there. Children should be protected from knowledge that belongs to adults. Our children, not our children immediate, but children in our society are growing up way too fast. Their age of innocence has shrunk down to where children that are, 10 years old and younger already understand a lot about sexuality, for instance. And the first exposure to pornography on average is like 9 years old. They haven't even gone through puberty at that point. And yet their minds, their eyes have already been exposed to things that they should never have seen in a whole lifetime. And sometimes parents, because we live in such a world and news reports are so salacious and they just talk about a lot of things with detail in movies and in songs and in news reports and in conversations, that children are hearing things that they don't need to hear. And we need to be careful if we're sitting in the front seat driving somewhere and our children are in the back seat, that we're not talking about things that they don't really need to hear. Because you better believe that they're listening. Now, it may not look like they're listening, but children don't miss very much, especially if you want them to miss it. They pick up on things really quickly. So just be careful about that. And don't leave the television or the computer streaming if something's on there and a child's in the room. Don't assume that they're not going to pay attention to that. They're not going to notice that. Get up and turn it off. Turn it over. If the music has bad lyrics in it, well, don't be listening to it in the first place. If it's the radio, well, turn it off. Change the station. Put in something else that, a list that you've created that doesn't have that in it. So be careful with children's ears. Be careful that they don't hear things, see things, observe things, learn things too early, because children's ears should be protected from knowledge that belongs to adults. And this little lad didn't really need to know about all the goings on of his king and his, Jonathan and David and all the adult violence and hatred and all. He didn't need to know that. And so Jonathan protects him from it. And you can put Ephesians 5:12 there as
Brother,
a passage. Yes.
yeah, quick comment. Many brothers and sisters in our churches think that preacher and teachers in the churches of Christ, we need to teach every Sundays. So, but it's very interesting your comment, because I believe we are a masters, we are a teacher, are preachers. But I was thinking in the first school of our children's is a family, So in the family, the original teacher is mom and dad. This is very important to clarify, because many, in my case, Spanish people, they want that preachers teach every Sunday. So I know this is very, very important to understand our first school is family. And this is my quick comment.
Yeah, it's a good comment. And I'll follow up on that, Sergio. It's an excellent comment. You remember a little while ago, I was talking about a primary relationship and secondary like the family of origin becomes secondary and the new couple's family is primary. Well, the same principle is true between the way that the church and the family school works together. So the primary teacher of the children is mom and dad. And the reason for that is, number one, God gave the responsibility to mom and dad rather than the church. The second reason is because they have the children 7 days a week. The church generally only has the children for 4 hours a week. And, vacation Bible school and some special events. But generally speaking, how much can you accomplish in 4 hours with children? Well, you can accomplish a lot, but not as much as you can in 164 hours that are left over that they're with the parents. So I think that it's not just Spanish culture, it's also English culture or American culture where there are parents who want the church to be responsible for the spiritual training of their children. And that's not how it works. The church is only supplemental. Primary is what you just said at home. And we need preachers and elders and churches that are very clear about that, because if you're relying on the church to be the spiritual teacher of your children are not likely to turn out very well because they just don't have enough time, and it's just not where the responsibility is. So take it, own it. They'll be grown soon enough. So use those days wisely and spend as much time with them as you can so that you can make as much impression. You can give them a running start in life toward heaven that they wouldn't have without good Christian parents. Good comment. All right, let's move on then into I talked too long and my iPad went to sleep. 41. So the arrows are shot long so that David will know to flee. But after Jonathan sends the little boy back and says, okay, I don't need you anymore. So then he meets secretly with David out there and they kissed one another. Again, that's not a romantic kiss. That's the kiss of greeting, like Romans 16:16, greet one another with a holy kiss. And many cultures today still kiss, and men kiss on the cheek when they meet. Nothing sexual about that, just like a handshake in American culture, same kind of thing. And wept with one another until David exceeded, King James has, he was just overcome with emotion, is what that means. And Jonathan said to David, go in peace. It's not safe for you to come. You need to go. For as much as we have sworn, both of us, in the name of the Lord, saying, the Lord be between me and thee, and between my seed and thy seed forever. So you see that this covenant was not just one generation, it was intergenerational. It was supposed to go to the next generation. And if you're familiar with what's coming in 2 Samuel, and I'm sure that you are, then David's going to honor this commitment after Jonathan's dead, and he's going to bless Mephibosheth, who's Jonathan's son, later because of the promise that was made here between these two. And he arose and departed, and Jonathan went into the city. So that gets us down to chapter 21, and I've already given you time to write those if you wanted to, and if you didn't, you can do it now. But we're going to call chapter 21 runaway fugitive, because David here has to flee for his life. He's a fugitive. The key verse is 21:9. The key thought is keep your vessel holy, and that's going to come from verse 5, and it's a reference to keeping the body free from sexual sin. And then the outline of this chapter, just 15 verses, but there are 5 sections to it. 1 through 3, a suspicious priest. When David shows up, he's going to ask some questions, which it turns out he was really wise to be suspicious, and David was too careless and deceitful, and it cost this priest and all these priests their lives because of that. It's another one of the sins of David, in my estimate, as you go through this fugitive time. This was a hard time for David, and he did not execute it perfectly, and this will be one of the times then he should have handled it differently. 4 through 7, an unusual meal where David and his men are allowed to eat the holy bread. Verse 8, an unfortunate spy who is Doeg, who happens to be there. He's not a priest, but he happens to be there, and he sees David, and he later tells Saul about this. Verse 9, a remarkable sword, that is the sword of Goliath, has been stored at this location, and David is given it because he had no weapon. And then 10 to 15, when David goes down to the Philistines, he tries to get help from them, but then ultimately they decide. The king says, "Hey, this is the guy that he's the leader, king of Israel. We should apprehend him." But then David pretends to be crazy, and he gets out of a tight situation there. He acts like he is mentally off, and then the king says, "Oh, forget it. Well, why do I need a madman here? I will, and just let him go." And so David is able to escape and get away when he was in a very sticky situation. Now, I know the iPad quit streaming there, so I'm going back to try to set it up again. Let's see if we can get it back on the screen. All right, it should be coming back up now. Tell me, can you see it now again? Yeah, there you go. All right, let's go into chapter 21 and observe there's 15 verses here, so we can, I think, get through this chapter and move on. We need to, we've got another hour, and we need to get on to toward chapter 25 if we can. So you have in verse 1, then came David to Nob, to Ahimelech, the priest. Ahimelech was afraid at the meeting of David, and he said to him, "Why art thou alone?" He's suspicious. You're not, you had 1,000 soldiers before, and now you're by yourself, or there's only a few men with you. What's going on here? And David said unto Ahimelech the priest, and this is why I said that other lie seemed to have been a lie. The king hath commanded me a business. That's a lie. The king was trying to kill him. He wasn't sending him on any business. And hath said unto me, let no man know anything of the business. So all this is made up. David lies about it. But we can take that statement that David made, and we can make a sermon based on it. Our king has commanded us a business. Our King Jesus has commanded us a business. Well, what has he commanded us to do? What's our business? Go into all the world and preach the gospel. Mark 16:15. Our King has commanded us a business that he wants us to worship God. John 4:24. Our King has commanded us a business to restore the erring. James 5:20. So you can add to that list. That thought lends itself to different applications that come from Jesus, things he's commanded us to do. All right, that gets us then down to verse 3. Now, therefore, what is under thy hand, or what do you have available? Give me 5 loaves of bread. So he's hungry, needs sustenance, needs supplies. And the priest said, I don't have any regular bread, common bread, but there is hallowed bread. This would be the showbread that was put in the tabernacle and then replaced every week. And so we've got hallowed bread here, but it's supposed to be used in the tabernacle. But the priest says, well, I guess I could give it to you if the young men have kept themselves at least from women. So if the men that were traveling with David, he didn't have his 1,000 soldiers, but he did have a small group of men. And the priest says, well, I can't give you holy bread if these men have been sleeping with women that they're not married to. I don't know about all that. I don't know a lot about that. I'm pondering that thought, but I think that you see there that there was immorality common among single men in that generation, like there is immorality common with men in every generation or in our generation. It doesn't make it right. It doesn't mean that David condoned it, but it's just acknowledged here. But in this case, David is able to defend the men who are traveling with him and says, yes, they are holy. They haven't been guilty of sexual sin. David answered the priest and said to them, of a truth, women have been kept from us about these 3 days since I came out, and the vessels of the young men are holy. So that was our key lesson from this chapter. Keep your vessel holy. So we want to make sure that if we're single or when we're single, that we are not involving ourselves in sexual activity. That's Hebrews 13:4 says, marriage is honorable in the bed and defiled, but whoremongers and adulterers God will judge. So that's not a privilege of a single person. Or for one outside of the marriage bed. One could be married and be guilty of sexual sin with someone else. So there's a lesson I think that we need to teach. Probably every generation needs that. Every location needs that. And we can also, at the same time, proclaim the forgiveness of God. And there are many who have been guilty of sexual sin or other sins that have repented and come back and been accepted by God. And therefore, we can offer hope as well. But especially when we're talking to young people, children that are old enough to begin dating and, during those teen years, to really caution them to be careful and don't be guilty of causing your vessel not to be holy. I think it's 1 Thessalonians 4:3-4 that uses the same terminology in the New Testament about the vessel, talking about the human body, human sexuality. At least in the King James, it uses the word vessel in that way. That gets us down to verse 6. The priest gives them the bread. Verse 7 is that man Doeg we talked about. He seems to have been jailed. He was detained at the tabernacle. So evidently he got in trouble for something and he's been incarcerated, and they are keeping him as a prisoner at the tabernacle, and he sees what goes on here. He's not a priest. He's a servant of Saul. He was the chief of the herdmen of Saul. That verse says he's not even a Jew. He's an Edomite. Verse 8, and David said to Ahimelech, and is there not here under thine hand spear or sword? He said, I need some food, but I also need a weapon. Do you have any weapons here? And then he explains it with this cover story. For I have neither brought my sword nor my weapons with me, because the king's business required haste. I had to leave so quickly, I didn't have time to go get my weapon. So do you have anything I could have? There's another sermon title there, The King's Business Requires Haste, today. In fact, you could build a different sermon here with this verse. What was it? Where we had the king has commanded us a business. That could be point one, the king has commanded us. Well, then point two, the king doesn't allow us to procrastinate on our business. That could even be your conclusion to that sermon. The king has commanded us, and then you drop down and in your application, you talk about we better get busy because this is the king's business, it's not ours, and we must get busy about the king's business. So in verse 9, the priest tells them, we don't have any sword here except Goliath's sword that you slew in the valley of Elah, and it's behind, we got it in safekeeping, it's wrapped in a cloth behind the ephod, which is the priest, it's like an apron the priest wore that had the Urim and Thummim with all the stones on it, and they could, cast Urim and Thummim, and the Lord would sometimes tell them yes or no, whether to do this thing or not do it. But anyway, it was in safekeeping there. And then here's another sermon title. There is none like it. David said, give it me. There's no sword like that. So give me that. I want that sword. But here's a way to preach that thought. There is none like our Father. There's no God like our God. Even the imagined gods of the heathen are not as good as the great God that is the true God, our Father. There's none like our Messiah. Nobody ever lived and taught and did what Jesus did. There is none like the church of Christ. There is none like the gospel, the Lord's Supper, fellowship that we have with Christians. There's no life like the Christian life. So that's an interesting way to preach some of the great New Testament truths under an Old Testament title. There is none like it. So verse 10, David leaves, takes the sword, takes the bread, and he goes over to Gath, which is a Philistine city, and he goes to the king there, whose name is Achish. And the servants of Achish said unto him, is not this David the king of the land? And then they heard about the song that they made up about David after Goliath. Saul has slain his thousands, David his 10,000s. So that music had made its way over to Philistia, and they knew that song too. And David laid up these words in his heart, and he was sore afraid of Achish that day. So what he's saying here, what the text is saying is that David knows he's made a mistake. He should not have gone to Gath. He thinks he can get some help over there, but instead he's put himself in a very dangerous situation. He does not have enough soldiers to deal with Achish. He's very vulnerable here. Now, verse 13, he changed his behavior before them, feigned himself. The word feigned means to pretend. He pretended to be crazy or mad. He acted like he had lost his mind or his marbles, and scrabbled on the doors of the gate, let his spittle fall down upon his beard. So he's really playing it up because his life may very well depend on it. And then Achish says, verse 14, you see the man is crazy. Why did you bring him to me? Have I need of madmen that you brought this fellow to play the madman in my presence? Shall this fellow come into my house? Why do you bring this crazy guy in here for? Get him out of here. There's something wrong with him. All right, so David escapes a very sticky situation by that deception. Now that gets us to chapter 22, and we're going to call this chapter Priest Slain, because Saul is going to arrive at Nob, and he's going to massacre or have these priests massacred who have helped David unwittingly. They didn't mean to do anything against the king, but it doesn't matter to him. The key verse is verse 18, 22:18, and the key thought is beware of self-pity. Saul is full of self-pity in this chapter, and we'll draw that out as we go through it. And it's embarrassing that a man who is in his position and his age should be saying the things that he's saying. the mental state of King Saul is at a low point here. He just has allowed himself to become fixated on this idea that David is his enemy and has to be destroyed. Now, there are 23 verses in this chapter, and there are 5 sections to it, and each one deals with a different person. And this is an easy way to preach, or an effective way. People like character studies or biographies. We can relate to them. And also, it gives you clear breaks in the chapter to be able to go from one section to the next. So this would be an easy outline to preach or to teach if you're going through the book of 1 Samuel. So in the first 5 verses, the emphasis is on David, and the lesson is grace under pressure. Grace under pressure. Verses 6 through 10, the emphasis is on Saul, and the lesson is he's a self-pitying tyrant. A self-pitying tyrant. And then verses 11 and 15, the middle of the chapter, is about the priest Ahimelech, and he's an innocent sufferer. 16 to 19, Doeg, the Edomite, who is an unconscionable savage. He just, in bloodlust, kills a whole village of people. Unconscionable. And then 20 to 23 is Abiathar, who is the only priest that escaped. And he comes to David. He's a grieving escapee. So you have those 5 characters in 5 sections with 5 lessons. Now let's go into it. 23, chapter 22 has 23 verses. And what I've done, as you see here, I've highlighted each time you change to a new character. Like that, you see the green screen, and you can do that in your Bible if you want to also, to make it jump off the page. Verse 1, David therefore departed thence and escaped to the cave Adullam, and when his brethren and all his father's house heard it, they went down thither to him. So what's happening here is David is left home a long time ago to go check on his brothers on the battlefield, and his father thought he'd be home that night or the next day, but then he killed Goliath, and Saul took him into his service, and everything is just taken off from there. And now he's been a fugitive for a while, and he's been away from his family again. So they miss him. They want to see him. And whenever they hear that he is close to them, then they all go over there, his brothers, his parents. So let me see if I can put this on the screen there and talk about, I mentioned we would come back to this. And you might notice that these are numbered in the order that they happened. So David is abbreviated just with a D here. So David serves in Saul's court, and Saul becomes jealous of him. That's at Gibeah. Then after Saul tries to kill David, he flees to Ramah, where Samuel lives. And then you have number 3. Let's see, where 1, 2.
It was there.
Did I miss it?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, there it is. There it is. So we go like this. 1, 2, 3, like that. Then back at Gibeah, Jonathan warns David of Saul's jealous anger. And then 4, David eats the bread of the priest. That's at Nob. And then number 5, David flees over to Gath. And that's where he pretends to be crazy to escape from having to, being apprehended by the king Achish. Then he goes down to Adullam. That's where we are now, the cave of Adullam. David meets his family here. That's the first part of the chapter, but it's also where he begins to amass his own army, his personal army that grows to 400 men and then maybe larger than that later. And then after this, we're going to see at the first part of this chapter that David secures the safety of his family by entrusting them to the king of Moab. So he gets his family away from the jurisdiction of Saul because he knows how crazy Saul is, and he figures that he may try to hurt David or draw David in by attacking his family or arresting them. So he gets them to safety. Then number 8, David spends time in the stronghold, which is in this area. And some people think that's the same as Masada. If you're familiar with excuse me, later Jewish history, Masada was the last place that fell to the Roman armies, and it's a pretty famous battle there. Could be the same place. Now, I'm not going to go into all this, but this continues the story from what we just saw on that screen. So if you remind me later, we can come back to this and track it on the map. But let's finish this chapter, which we just covered on that map. So we're down to verse 3. Verse 2 is, verse 1 is family come. So this is a family visit. Verse 2 is where he begins to collect an army, where you have every man that was in debt, discontent, in distress. They came to him. He became their captain, and he soon had 400 men. Well, in one way, that's really nice because he's got an army now, and Saul has an army, so that's helpful. But the other side of that is you got to feed 400 people, and that's not easy to do. And you got to be over 400 people, which these are malcontents, and malcontents are not easy to lead either. So you have here both, I guess you would say a mixed blessing, both a blessing but also a challenge to David when these men come and make him their captain. That gets us then to verse 3. Then David went thence to Mizpah of Moab. So I drew that line over past the Dead Sea. That's Moab on that other map. Let my father and my mother, I pray thee, come forth and be with you till I know what God will do with me. You notice how he's living in view of the providence of God. And all of us should have that same attitude. What's God going to do with me today? And what happens in my life is a result of God's blessing or sometimes of God's testing. Now, there's a lesson in verse 3. He's protecting his family, like Jesus asked John to take care of his mother when he was on the cross. It's the same kind of thing. And if you were doing a lesson on David and Jesus, David as a type of the Messiah, then that's one of the lessons you might want to bring out, that both David and Jesus took care of family responsibilities. Now that brings us to verse 4. The king of Moab accepts that responsibility. Verse 5, the prophet Gad, so here's another prophet. The prophet Gad said to David, abide not in the hold. You can't stay here. You're going to have to get thee into the land of Judah. Depart and get into the land of Judah. David went to the forest of Hareth. Let's see if we can find the forest of Hareth. Here it is on the map. So David is down here talking to Moab, and then he gets back up here, goes back up toward Judah. In verse 6, Saul heard that David was discovered. He finally heard where he was. Somebody discovered him and reported it. And the men that were with him now saw a boat in Gibeah under a tree and Ramah having a spear in his hand. He seems to always been carrying that spear around. The javelin that he tried to kill David with earlier, he's got a spear in his hand now. I made a note, and all his servants were standing about him. And Saul said unto his servants that stood about him, they're just standing around. They don't seem to have any purpose. The reason is they don't have any leadership. If you have a congregation that doesn't have any leadership, they're just going to be standing around. They're not going to be getting anything done, because you have to have leadership to get people engaged. And here you have an example of negative leadership, in that Saul is just fixated on killing David, and he doesn't even know where he is half the time, so he's just sitting around waiting for somebody to turn him in. Now, here's a lesson called Under a Tree, because here you have Saul is under a tree. And here are some other characters under a tree that you can make a sermon about. Deborah in the book of Judges was under a tree. Saul here. Elijah under the juniper tree. Nathaniel in the New Testament. And Jonah under the gourd vine or tree. So you have diverse lessons, situations, but they all involve a tree. So you can tie them together and make I think, an interesting study. Now verse 7, and Saul said unto his servants, hey, hear now, you Benjamites, will the son of Jesse give every one of you fields and vineyards, and make all of you So this is the paranoia of Saul again. He's down to only a few soldiers, and now he's afraid that they're going to join sides with David too. They're going to go over like Jonathan, my son, did and be on his side. He's feeling insecure. So what he's doing here is bribing them. He's saying, you got it a lot better over here with me, because I'm going to give you fields and vineyards. I'm going to promote you to be captain of 1,000 or of hundreds. So you better stay with me. That's in your best interest. So what he's saying is, you know what side your bread is buttered on. That's how we would say it. You might not know that statement, but in the South, that's the way we would say it. You know what side your bread is buttered. In other words, you better stay with me, because this, I'm going to take care of you. Now, verse 8, that all of you have conspired. Now notice who he's talking to. These are the ones who are still loyal to him. They're right there with him. But notice how he castigates them and makes them feel guilty when they shouldn't feel guilty. They're the ones that are with him. Now we're going to have a lesson here about self-pity. It's really about Saul, but the first point is about Saul's. I think we can put it under the heading of Saul's sins. We'll see how that plays out as we go through. But what I've done is highlighted the personal pronouns here. You see where his focus is. It's only on himself. You have conspired against me, and there is none that showeth me that my son hath made a league with the son of Jesse. And there is none of you that is sorry for me. You see his self-pity there. Nobody feels sorry for me like I deserve, or showeth unto me that my son has stirred up my servant against me. Jonathan didn't do that. Jonathan had tried to keep this from being a problem, but instead Saul made a problem. But his imagination is just creating this narrative that's just not true. Against me to lie in wait as at this day. It's not David that is lying in wait of Saul. It's Saul that's lying in wait of David. So he's transferring his own sin over to David, who's not even guilty of it. Now, after he makes that statement, you have Doeg, who had been, there the day that David came to Nob. And he said, I saw the son of Jesse coming to Nob, to Ahimelech the son of Ahitub, and he inquired of the Lord for him. That's not true. And Ahimelech is going to deny that later, and there's no record of it before. So Doeg has made this up. It's a lie, the first part, and gave him victuals, and that's how you say that word, victuals, and that is true, and gave him the sword of Goliath, and that's true. So he exaggerated what Ahimelech did, but it was partially true. The king sent to call Ahimelech the priest to him and all the other priests, and they came, and Saul said, verse 12, greeted him, verse 13, why have you conspired against me? So Ahimelech was suspicious of David, and David lied to him, and now the suspicion is proving to have been worthwhile. And thou hast inquired of God for him, verse 13, that he should rise against me to lie in wait. That's not true. But Ahimelech said, no, you got this all wrong. Who is more faithful of all your servants than your own son-in-law, David? He's your servant. I helped him because he works for you, and goeth at thy bidding, and honor, and is honorable in thine house. So Ahimelech is stating his case honestly, but it's not going to prove to be sufficient to convince Saul of anything. So that gets us down to verse 15. Did I begin to inquire of God for him? Far be it from me, he said. In other words, I did not do that. That's a lie. That's not true. I didn't inquire of the Lord for him at all. Let not the king impute anything to thy servant, nor to all the house of my father. Thy servant knew nothing of this, less or more. I did not know any of this stuff was going on. I'm innocent. Now, he does not comment about the sword and about the food, because he did do those things. But he did answer the first one, so I didn't do those things. But he did say, I didn't know about it. That's why I helped him. And the king said, thou shalt surely die. So point number 2 about the sins of Saul is murdering innocent people. These are the priests of God. And so he tells his soldiers, his footmen, to kill them all, and they won't do it. And then he says to Doeg, well, you do it. You kill all the priests. And Doeg did, and he slew 85 priests. And then he goes further in verse 19, and smote the city with the edge of the sword, both men and women, children and sucklings, and oxen and asses and sheep at the edge. He just goes on a bloodlust killing spree and kills a whole city of people. I don't even like to think about that. But he killed women, children, animals, everybody in the city. And Saul lets him do it, but he does miss killing one person. That one person is Abiathar, who is one of the sons of Ahimelech. And Abiathar fled to David and told him what Saul had done to the priest. And David said to Abiathar, I knew it that day when Doeg the Edomite was there, that he would surely tell Saul, I have occasioned the death of all these. So David now is feeling guilty because of what he did. But I wrote a note up here. If he knew it that day, which he says, why didn't he say something that day? Why didn't he tell the priest the truth that day? Instead of telling him lies that got him killed, David should have told him the truth, or should have at least have warned him that you are now in jeopardy because Saul is after me. So David, in my estimate, is guilty of a grievous sin here of getting all these people killed. It's really on Saul because Saul's the one that did it and Doeg, but David also is not innocent here for the way he handled the situation. Now, verse 23, abide thou with me. In other words, David is saying to the young man, Abiathar, you stay with me, I'll protect you. For he that seeketh my life seeketh thy life, but with me thou shalt be in safeguard. So basically what he's saying is, we are in this together. Stay with me and I'll protect you. That gets us to chapter 23. And we're going to call this, do you know this phrase, on the lam? Do you know that phrase? All right. It's a fugitive term, like if someone escapes from prison and they're running from the law, they're on the lam. That's a phrase that's used for that situation. On the lam. They're trying to escape capture. And that's what David is doing here. He's trying to escape capture. He's fleeing as a fugitive. Now, your keys to this chapter, the key verse is 23:16, which is a verse about friendship. The key thought, when in doubt, pray. And that's in verse 2 and again in verse 4. When in doubt, pray. There's power in prayer. The outline, there are 29 verses in this chapter. 1 through 6 David rescues Keilah. 7 through 12, David asks God. In verses 13 through 18, David visits Jonathan. And then in 19 to 29, David escapes Saul. So this is an eventful chapter for David. A much better chapter for David than the previous one. All right. I'm going to make that smaller. Hopefully, if you're still writing, can you still read that? Can you still get that down? And that will allow me to go ahead and cover verse 1 while you're finishing that. Then they told David, saying, behold, the Philistines fight against Keilah, and they rob the threshing floors. So these are pretty smart Philistines. They wait for the Jews to plant the crops, cultivate the crops, pick the crops, bring the crops in from the field and start threshing the wheat. And then they attack them and steal the wheat. It's like they've done all the work. Now let's go get all the food. Well, they're robbing the threshing floors. Now, the first lesson in verse 1, or the only lesson listed in verse 1, remember, even if we are having problems, others may need our help too. There have been times in my life when I was going through a really, really hard time, really difficult circumstances as a preacher in a congregation. But the congregation still needed me, and they didn't know about the situation. They learned later, but they didn't know then about, and they never really tied the two together, I'm sure. But there were times when I was really hurting on the inside, really struggling to deal with something, and yet somebody else comes to me for counseling or for help with their situation. And so what would I do? What should a preacher do in that situation? Well, he just puts aside his own situation and tries to help them with their situation. And God gives strength to be able to do that. So here's a lesson from David, who's having a lot of problems himself, but he takes time to help the city of Keilah, who also has problems. So remember, even if we're having problems, others may need our help. And you can put down those verses, Romans 1:14, Galatians 6:2, Galatians 6:10, and James 1:27 there. Now, I'm going to switch over to the other screen to show where Keilah is. So let me go back over and see if we can find it on the map. So you see Keilah is here. And this is where we are in chapter 23. David saves the town of Keilah from the Philistines, but is forced to flee when Saul learns that he is there. So that's where we are right now. And this is the area. So David is just running around in this area trying to escape Saul. So he's in one place, then another place, another place. He's just bouncing around because Saul's trying to catch up to him to kill him. So now he's gone from, over here to here to here, and now he's over here. So Saul can't keep up with it. Now we go back to chapter 23. And our next lesson is in verse 2. Therefore David inquired of the Lord. So we're marking all the verses in the book of 1 Samuel about prayer. So here's another synonym for prayer is inquired of the Lord. That means he prayed, saying, shall I go and smite these Philistines? So David said, I heard about what's going on. Do you want me to go over there and help your people? And the Lord said, go and smite the Philistines and save Keilah. So the lesson in verse 2 is, it is always proper to pray before deciding something. It's always proper to pray. Are you thinking about taking another job in another city? Well, have you prayed about that yet? You should pray. Are you thinking about asking this woman to be your wife? Well, have you prayed about that? Or are you thinking about accepting this man's proposal? Well, have you prayed about it? Are you thinking about having a child together or another child together? Well, have you prayed about that? Are you thinking about, just go on down the list. There are a lot of decisions that we make in life, but we are foolish to make them without asking for God's wisdom and guidance and for God's blessing. And I don't know if I've done this a long time, but I certainly have done it recently and maybe in the recent past. I've started asking God to not allow me to do something if he doesn't want me to. And I think that has helped me sometimes when I would have done the wrong thing, but it got blocked by circumstances or someone else's decision. I'm like, I'm disappointed, but I really can't complain about that because I asked the Lord not to let this happen if he didn't want it to. And if it was his will to let it happen or cause it to happen. So there are several verses on prayer there that you could use to make that point. That gets us to verse 3. And David's men said unto him, now remember, these are not trained soldiers. These are misfits. These are men that were in debt and discontent and all that. So they don't want to go fight. They're not soldiers. They're just out there because they didn't have, they couldn't say where they were. And they heard David was a fugitive. They're fugitives, so they went to it. But now David's telling them, we got to go fight the Philistines. They're like, whoa. We didn't sign up for that. So they were afraid to fight the Philistines. And so David says, well, how am I going to, God said go, but they don't want to go. So how am I going to handle this? So here's a lesson. Leaders should keep in mind that followers may not be immediately on board with their plans. What I have noticed being in elders meetings and discussing things, sometimes for months behind closed doors in a church setting, like a congregation, and we haven't told the congregation anything about it yet. We've been planning, we've been praying, we've been thinking about it, talking about it. So it's old news in our minds because we've been talking about it a long time. But then we go out and announce it to the congregation, and they're like, what? That was a surprise to them. So sometimes you have to bring people up to speed before expecting them to immediately buy into something. And that's what David is doing here. And as far as elders and church leaders are concerned, two great passages on that are Hebrews 13:7 and 17 and 1 Peter 5, 1 through 3. Two good passages about elders and shepherds. Now, they were afraid to go. How much more than that what they say is, we're already afraid here in Judah. We got enough problems already with Saul trying to catch us. And now you want to take us over here to fight the Philistines too? It's like, wait, we got enough trouble. We don't need to go pick somebody else's fight. So David is like, oh, what am I supposed to do here? The Lord said go. My men don't want to go. So what does he do? He prays again. That's a good thing to do. So David inquired of the Lord yet again. And the Lord answered him and said, arise and go to Keilah, and I will deliver the Philistines into thine hand. So now God has given them another assurance that they are not going to be defeated by the Philistines. You will win this battle. So here's the lesson. Leaders should make accommodations to allay followers' fears. So David didn't just tell them, "Hey, you listen to me. I'm the leader here. You go put your sword on. We're going to go fight." No, he made some accommodations to how they felt. He said, "Okay, well, let me ask the Lord again about it. Let me make sure." And when he did, then they were willing to follow him this time. And there are several verses that you can put with that point from, especially from Psalms, but also Romans 2:4. Then down to verse 5, so David and his men went to Keilah, fought with the Philistines, and defeated them. So they were rewarded with cattle. Remember, he was having to feed all these men. So now he's got cattle, and smote them with a great slaughter, and David saved the inhabitants of Keilah. So that's a wonderful thing to help out this city. Now, you also understand, have a lesson here about God. God is understanding and patient with men's fears too. God says, I'll help you. And he doesn't get onto David for asking a second time. He just reiterates the truth and promises to help. So God is patient, and God understands that leaders sometimes find themselves in a challenging situation. That gets us down to verse 6. Abiathar brought the ephod with him when he fled from Nob. In verse 6, verse 7, was told Saul that David was come to Keilah. And Saul said, God hath delivered him into my hands because he is shut in. He's in a city that he can't get out of. It's got bars. It's got gates. He's going to be stuck there. So let's go down there and catch him. So I made this point here. David is only an imaginary enemy of Saul. He's not really an enemy at all. So really, who should have been fighting the Philistines who were attacking Hebrew people? It should have been the king, right? It should have been Saul. But Saul wasn't doing his job. And the Jewish city was being attacked by Philistines, and they did not have anybody to help them until David stepped up. It wasn't even David's job. David is a fugitive himself. So you see how Saul is distracted from being from governing his people, from doing his job. So the lesson is imaginary enemies can distract us. Sometimes churches get into that situation. You know, they get to feuding with each other, and they're not doing the work of the Lord. They're distracted from what is really important. Imaginary enemies are no enemy at all. So don't get distracted with and get yourself in a fight you don't need to be in. You know, fight the devil, fight the world, fight evil, wickedness in high places, but don't attack innocent people and don't attack your own brethren unless there is a reason called false doctrine or sin, something that is a threat to God's people. Well, that brings us down. Saul is going to go down to Keilah, and then David heard about it, and he asked the priest to bring the ephod, and he said, O Lord God of Israel, verse 10, thy servant hath certainly heard that Saul's coming. Will the men of Keilah deliver me up into his hand? Now remember, David just saved them from the Philistines. So are they going to be true to me, or are they going to rat me out? They're going to turn me over. And will Saul come down as I have heard? And the Lord said he's going to come down. And will the men of Keilah turn me over to him? And the Lord said, yep, they're going to turn you over to him. So David said, well, I got to get out of here then. So he leaves. And now his army has grown to 600 men. So there's still more people coming to him, making it a larger army. There is one lesson to be learned here about the will of God, because God told David, Saul is going to come to Keilah. When you read the rest of this chapter, does Saul ever go to Keilah? He does not. So is God wrong here? No. This is what's called the circumstantial will of God. The circumstantial will of God means if the circumstances stay as they are now, this is what's going to happen. In other words, if you stay in the city, Saul's going to come down here. But when the circumstances changed, then the will of God changed, or the what God had said would happen never happened, because David made a different decision. Now, you and I in our lives make decisions all the time, and it changes the will of God in the sense that there is an ideal will of God for what he wants to use us for in our whole lives. But then we mess that up. You know, he may want a man to be a preacher, for instance, but the man say, I don't want to be a preacher. Well, does that mean God throws him away and he can never use him for anything? No, God can adjust and use him in some other capacity, because man has freedom of will. You could go further into that, and I really haven't thought all the way through that, but it certainly is the case that God adjusts what he wants from us and expects of us, and how he's going to use us in his providence based on decisions that we have made or that we are constantly making. That's the only way it could work, because we have freedom of will.
Real quick.
Yes.
I was thinking before the Saul slew the whole priest and everything. That was a bad decision from David, but the good thing that is that now he has Aviatar, so he can inquire with the thought to God, and he didn't have that before.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So,
I had not thought of that. That's good.
So how the providence of God works even with bad decisions of David.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. You know, it doesn't matter how many times you read something, you can learn something else. It was there all the time, but, you know, I'm sure there are things I'm saying, you've read this chapter, you say, well, I didn't see that before, you know, and now you read the chapter and you're seeing something, I should have thought of that. That's really good. So we see what I just said, that Saul did not end up going down to Keilah. He forbore to go forth when he heard that David was escaped out of the city. So the circumstantial will of God changed because the circumstances changed. That gets us down to 14. So David is hiding out in the wilderness of Ziph. So we go back over to our map and we see the wilderness of Ziph is here. So he's just bouncing around different locations in this area. And now he's right there in the middle. So that gets us on down. Where are we? We're at verse 14. And Saul sought him every day, but God delivered him not into his hand. So I made the note above that. Saul was not getting much governing done, was he? He's forsaking the people. He's neglecting his responsibilities because he's gotten sidetracked. And there are church leaders, preachers, some very talented preachers that I've known through the years, and they get sidetracked on being brotherhood policemen, for instance, and trying to, inventing problems and attacking people that really don't need to be, they need to be left alone and encouraged to do the work of God. But, they're not doing the work God had for them to do because they're busy doing something that just distracted them. Or it could even be something like a job. God's got some really good work to do, but he gets a job. He's pursuing money or maybe pleasure, and he's not doing what God wants. So you can make that lesson from verse 14. Now in verses 15, 16, and 17, we find a sermon. So David is in the wilderness of Ziph, and Jonathan, Saul's son, arose and went to David and strengthened his hand in God. And he said unto him, fear not. And so there's a lesson here about what to do when you have a friend in trouble. When a friend is in trouble, what should you do? Well, number one, go. Go see him. Saul's son arose and went to David. You got a friend that's going through a really tough time? Well, drop what you're doing and go help him. Go help her. Number two, put yourself at his or her disposal. Put yourself at his or her disposal. What can I do? How can I help? You think about Job's friends. Job's friends turned out not to be really great friends, but one thing that you can say for them, and I wrote an article one time, actually two articles. One of them, what Job's friends did right. What Job's friends did right. And there's a good lesson to be learned there. And then what Job's friends did wrong. And there's also a good lesson to be learned there. But Job's friends did this right. They left where they lived and they went to where Job was. And they sat with him for 7 days. Well, that's the right thing to do, to go help your friend in trouble. Now, point number 3 is strengthen your friend spiritually. Jonathan strengthened David's hand in God. When you're being persecuted and when it's long term, it's really hard to keep your spiritual life and your faith strong. So Jonathan talks to him about God. Jonathan urges him to be faithful and to continue to do what God wants him to do, and not to allow Saul to turn David away from what's right. And then number 4, you see at the bottom of that screen, encourage your friend. Fear not. This is going to be all right. We're going to get you through this. God is going to bless you. Fear not. I know that color is not really easy to see through. I probably need to change it, but see what, I can just move it off of that and you'll be able to read it a little better, I think. All right, now I'll put it back on the screen. When a friend is in trouble, number 1, go. Number 2, put yourself at their disposal. Number 3, strengthen his hand in God. And number 4, encourage. All right. Thou shalt be king of Israel, and I shall be next to thee. That's not actually how it worked out. But you see where Jonathan's heart is there, don't you, in verse 17? Jonathan said, you're going to be king, and I'm going to be vice king. Or you be president, I'll be vice president. In other words, I'll be your right-hand helper. So that's how Jonathan sees it working out. But Jonathan doesn't live for that to take place. Verse 18, the two made a covenant before the Lord. So this is the third time we see that covenant between them. Verse 19, the Ziphites turn David in. So the Ziphites go up to Saul and they say, David's down here with us. Come down here and you can catch him. So Saul goes down there to try to find him, and he compliments the Ziphites. Blessed be ye of the Lord. Well, this isn't the Lord's business to kill David, but Saul still says, bless ye of the Lord, for ye have compassion on me. That's that self-pity again. Woe is me, poor little me. And then notice the personal pronouns. Again, personal pronouns. Me, I, all the way through this section. You have Saul being guilty of just seeing himself, just seeing his own problems. And they're not really even his own problems. He made them up. Now, I made a note above, or in verse 22, that Saul is living in a world of rumors, suspicion, and fear. Saul is living in a world of rumors, suspicion, and fear. And you know, when somebody gets into that mental state, it's hard to keep a marriage together. It's hard to keep a job. It's hard to maintain friendships because that's a mental situation. He is living in a world of rumors, suspicions, and fear. You can't really reason with him because he's not living in the reasonable world. He's living in a different world. Now, when you read this, and I was listening to this as I was driving up here again today, and it's interesting how Saul speaks of David, because he speaks of him in a dehumanizing way. He talks about him lurking. That's an animal term. Let's see if I can find some of these. He dealeth very subtly. That's what people are telling me. He's a slippery eel. He's subtle. He's sneaky. Well, he's lurking places. He hides himself. Those are animal terms. So in his mind, he's chasing after an enemy that's less than him, that has animal characteristics, that's not on his level. But the opposite is actually true. And they arose and went to Ziph before Saul, and David and his men were in the wilderness of Maon in the plain of the south of Jezamon. So let's go over real quick and see that on the map. So here's Carmel and Maon. Here's Ziph. So he's still down in this southern part. This is at the lower end of the Dead Sea, so you're really far down in Jewish territory there. And I see our time's about up, so let me finish this chapter, and we'll be done for today. You see verse 26, Saul went on this side of the mountain, and David and his men went on the other side. So they're so close together that Saul almost catches him. But David is on the other side. They're just circling. He's really close. And verse 27, but there came a messenger unto Saul. I made a question or a note here. This may be God's providence, because just about the time he's closest to catching David, a messenger came saying, haste thee and come, for the Philistines have invaded the land. So Saul had to leave chasing David and go fight the Philistines at a place called Shala Hama Lekoth, which means the rock of divisions or escape. The rock of divisions or escape. That's a long name. That'd make a really good test question, and I would make sure you had to spell it correctly to get it right. No, I probably won't put that on your test. Actually, I didn't write the test. I don't know if it's on there or not, but that's a long name, isn't it? And David went up from there and dwelt in the strongholds of En Gedi. All right, so that gets us down. We covered a good bit of ground today, but um, we were supposed to get 24 and 25 today too, that was the original syllabus. I didn't write that syllabus, but I don't think that they covered it verse by verse if they covered all those chapters today. So I think that we'll still be able to cover everything and slow down just a little bit here, but we'll see. May have to speed up later, but at any rate, we'll start at chapter 24 if the Lord wills on Tuesday. I'll be back in Memphis on Tuesday, Lord willing. So we'll have our regular class. It won't really matter to you, I don't think, but we will still be by Zoom or by StreamYard. Anybody have a question or a comment before we close our class and have our prayer?
Brother, I was thinking how difficult it was for David, because there was not only Saul, but all the people was trying to please Saul, giving news about David, so he couldn't breathe or he couldn't rest, and that is now has more how can I say, has more sense when David wrote those psalms, hide
Yeah,
in the cave of Abdullah and in Gedi, and
yeah, that's right. It's always good, and I said this in Psalms that you went in that class, but I haven't done that as much as I should have. But one of the rules for interpreting Psalms is to read the historical context if you know it. Like if it says Cave of Adullam or Engedi in the inscription of the Psalm, then go find that chapter and read it, and then read the Psalm. And like you said, it makes a lot more sense, and you can really put yourself in David's place and say, man, he's got to be tired. He's really got to be stressed. In fact, later he's going to go out of the country and get away from Saul, because nobody can stay under that kind of pressure forever. So David is going to have to flee. But at this point, he doesn't know that yet, or it's not to that point yet. But you're absolutely right.
and I was thinking all these people that were trying to give news to Saul, what they could think after David was crowned.
Yeah,
So all that they did, and now he's king, and so I was
yeah.
thinking about
Like
that.
you picked the wrong horse. You picked the wrong political side, and now you're on the losing side. But at this point, I guess it made sense to them. Saul's king, David's just a boy, young man. So they figured it was, safer to go with Saul. But the Lord was with David, and that's really all that mattered. That was the tipping point. All right. Anybody else? We'll get David to lead our prayer. But if anyone else wants to say something, feel free to, and we'll close out our class.
Yeah, so David always move consulting God and pray. So he never moved without consulting God. So and that's why he never fell into Saul's hand. So I learned today. So in my life, in our life, is in the hands of the Lord. So the enemy cannot defeat us. And
Yeah.
also always we have to ask to the Lord before act, and before the think also we have to pray all the time, because how he estranged David, he can estrange us also. Thank you.
That's a good. Well said. Well said. All
Yes,
right.
I
Let's.
was thinking, brother.
Yeah. Go ahead, bro.
Yeah, a spiritual ally is very important. Maybe, you know, it could be our wife, or could be a friend like Jonathan in our churches, the family, So a good spiritual ally is important. So I was thinking in David and
Mhm.
Jonathan, uh, and this
Yeah,
relationship, is very
it is
interesting.
very. Yeah, it's very applicable to our lives, isn't it? Even though it's 3,000 years old now, you can still see the same kind of relationships today, and how David and Jonathan had what we really want, what we really need in friendship, and how that the same things that worked for them work for us. You know, the love, the support, the faith in God, all those things are still important today, just like they were. Good point. All right, David, how about closing us out with a prayer, please, sir?
Sure. Let's pray. Our Heavenly Father, hallowed be thy name. Father, we come to your throne humble and recognizing that you have all the power, all the authority, and you can always work the best for your sons. Thank you for this time that we already studied your word and learned about that servant of yours, David. Thank you, Father, because we can grasp and we can understand and we can extract some lessons for our life. Thank you, Father, for that. Please bless and take care of Brother Webster and his travels, his work, and for all the students as well, that all the work that we are doing in our congregations. Thank you for the school, for all the job that they are doing. In the name of Jesus Christ, we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. Good prayer. All right. Have a good weekend, everyone. And I guess we'll see you on Tuesday. If you need anything from me, you can message me and I'll try to get back to you. So be sure to read the syllabus and keep up with the dates and keep up with your memory work and your reading assignment and also your writing assignment. This is not as long as some of the classes. Like Psalms is twice as long as this class. So your test dates and your due dates are going to come sooner than in some of the classes. So just be sure to stay up on that so you have a chance to do your best work and not have to rush. All right,
Brother,
take care.
real quick, so how can we report to you the our reading? Just let you
Uh,
know
an
what
honor,
to.
an honor statement, which means text me, WhatsApp me, or email me and say I have completed the reading for these days or
Mhm,
this week, or like I think the reading assignment includes reading the chapters before the class and
mhm,
then reading the handouts after the class we cover. So once you complete, chapter 1, 2, 3, whatever, just say I finished the reading for chapters 1 through 10 or through 1 through 23,
mhm.
whatever it is we're on. And
Okay.
I usually give grades for a reading grade for every week. So
Mm,
you end up getting like several grades that pull up your average
mm,
if you keep up with your reading.
okay.
Because that I think that helps you. You don't have to make quite as high on the test because you can do the reading, and then I'm going to be averaging like 12 grades instead of 3. So that makes it easier to make an A in the class. So.
Mhm. And for the paper, do you want something like mm, with the same like titles for sections and everything? Not like a sermon, right? But more like an article.
Yeah, it needs to be in a paper style, not a sermon style. So a paper
Mm,
has a cover sheet, and then it's double space, 12
mm,
point Times New Roman. The length is stated in the syllabus, and you want your headings to be centered and bold.
mm,
Do not add space between paragraphs except for double space. Make it consistently spaced all the way through,
mm.
and then
Okay.
a works cited list at the end. There's probably a standard in the school that's used, and I'll accept that standard if it's MLA or Chicago style, whatever the school other classes tell you to do. You can do that in my class on a paper.
Okay. Thank
And
you.
if you wanna run it by me ahead of time, if you've been working on it and you want to see it, say, how does this look? Do you want me to change anything? I'll be glad to look at it and tell you if I want anything changed, and it won't affect your grade. It'll help your grade. So,
Okay. Thank you.
all right, thank y'all. We'll talk
Bye
to
bye.
you Tuesday, Lord willing.
Thank you, brother.
Thank you, brother.